These sessions are based on the book The Messiah Codes Unsealed.
Hi, welcome to the Messiah Codes. This is session 13, 6,000 Years Countdown, part 2. Through these last sessions, we have focused on the prophecies related to the date of the dedication of the Third Temple. And through this current 3-session series, we're analyzing Genesis 6:3 as the prophetic 6,000 year countdown during which the Father will contend with humanity from the fall, not from the creation, to the dedication of the Third Temple in 2030. We read in Genesis 6:3, "And the Lord said, My spirit shall not strive with man forever, for he is indeed flesh. Yet his days shall be 120 years. It's important to emphasize that the Father said that he will not contend with man for 120 Jubilee years. He didn't say for 6,000 years. I was surprised when I found out that those 6,000 years are part, but not the whole prophecy. That will be clear as we progress through these studies. Being surprised became part of my journey as I worked through the model. Things that I didn't expect became obvious as more mysteries were unsealed. For instance, Session 7, the fifth code, caught me completely by surprise. And when I understood what is it that I was seeing, a strong sense of awe and reverent fear filled my heart and my mind. So remember, like John Revere says, believe what you read, don't read what you believe. On this session, we will calculate the second 2,000-year segment from the birth of Abraham to the birth of Jesus. Remember that I am numbering the years using the year chronology from our Gregorian calendar, so that it is easy for everyone to understand the year we are discussing. But I'm using the structure of the Jewish year. So the year 2030 goes from the evening of September 9, 2029 to the daytime of September 27, 2030. In case you want more analysis than we are doing in these videos, especially decoding the end times prophetic mysteries, remember that these videos are based on the book The Messiah Codes Unsealed. The calculations of the second 2,000-year segment is very interesting because it has several parameters set by the Bible in reference to certain events, and all these parameters must be satisfied. Those parameters, far from making the calculations more difficult, guide us through the calculations and confirm whether we are on the right track or not. We read in Genesis 21:5. Now Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. We continue using the same method to calculate the year of birth, so that Abraham was in his 100th year of life between his 99 and 100th birthday, or 99.5 years old. So we see in this table, you're part of the model, that Abraham has Isaac 99 and a half years old. The running total from Abraham's birth to the birth of Isaac is 99.5 years. And the calculations tell us that Isaac was born in the year 1905 BC. We read in Genesis 25:26 about Jacob and Esau. Isaac was 60 years old when Rebekah, his wife, bore them. Isaac was in his 60th year of life, between his 59 and 60th birthday, or 59 and a half years old on the average. So we see now here that Jacob was born when Isaac was 59 and a half years old, and the running total is 159 years from the birth of Abraham to the birth of Jacob. And Jacob was born in the year 1846 BC. Then we read in Genesis 47:28. And Jacob lived in the land of Egypt 17 years. So the length of Jacob's life was 147 years. Jacob was in his 130th year when he got to Egypt. So 147 minus 17, it was 130. Therefore, we use 129.5 years. So we see that from Jacob to Egypt was 129.5 years. The running total now from the birth of Abraham to the beginning of the stay in Egypt was 288.5 years, and that occurred in the year 1716 BC. So the calculations for the next date must also satisfy the following verses. 400 years sojourning or living as strangers and afflicted in a land not theirs. That's Genesis 15:13. About 450 years from the first judge to the death of Samuel, Acts 13:20. And the temple construction on the 480th year from the beginning of the Exodus. That's 1 Kings 6:1. So we read in Genesis 15:13. Then he said to Abraham, know certainly that your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, and will serve them, and they will afflict them 400 years. Let's make an analysis of the translation of this verse directly from the Hebrew. There are words in the verse that have more than one translation. For instance, the word eretz, which means land. The land can be a region, or a nation, or a group of nations, or part of a nation. In this verse, which one is it? A careful analysis of the text explains that it does not refer to any particular country, but rather it refers to the land where Israel was a stranger, living as a stranger. As per the Bible, these were two regions or two countries where the nation of Israel was a stranger, living as a stranger, Canaan and Egypt. This is Genesis 15:13 in Hebrew, right? Remember to read it from the right to the left. So the top row is the original Hebrew. The next row is the translation, the traditional translation, and the bottom row is my suggestion to correct the translation and avoid the historical and even biblical problems that the current translation brings. Remember that before Canaan was given to Israel after the Exodus, Abraham and his descendants, Isaac and Jacob, were strangers in the land of Canaan, as well as in Egypt. We read in Genesis 37:1, now Jacob dwelt in the land where his father was a stranger, in the land of Canaan. So let's read again from right to left. And he said to Abraham, surely know that strangers will be your descendants in a land, and I don't have any adjustments to do there. And continue, that is not theirs, and will serve them, and they will afflict them 400 years. So that's the translation, the common translation now. Now, this is what I'm suggesting. That is not theirs, and work, as in work in the land, and afflicted be 400 years. And I'm going to explain in a second why. The Hebrew word arbad, or work, translated as and will serve them, is the same word used in Genesis 2:5, 2:15, 3:23, and 4:2. And in this verse, it is more appropriately translated as work in the land, as is translated in those verses. And I'm going to explain why. The concept of the word is work. This will be important as we continue analyzing the verse. Again, in the biblical context, the word eretz, land, can be a nation and or region, a group of nations or regions, or part of a nation. The way the verse is currently translated appears as if it refers only to Israel staying in the land of Egypt, and would indicate that Israel worked the land and would be afflicted only in one land, in Egypt. But if you understood as the land where Israel was a stranger, which is stated in the beginning of the verse, then the text refers to two regions, Canaan and Egypt. Israel, Jacob and his descendants, worked the land in Canaan and in Egypt for 400 years. but they were afflicted only in Egypt and for less than 400 years. For instance, for many years after they arrived to Egypt, they were protected by Pharaoh until at least until Joseph's death. So if you combine the two events and understand that Israel worked the land where they were strangers, both in Canaan and Egypt, and they were afflicted for a total of 400 years, then that is accurate, the addition of the two. So the original verse literally says that the descendants of Abraham would be strangers in a land they would work and be strangers in a land where they would be afflicted for a total of 400 years. Let's analyze the verse in the context of other verses and history. Israel, Jacob, is the only patriarch that satisfied those two conditions. He lived as a stranger in the land of Canaan, Genesis 37:1, where they worked the land until he was 129 and a half years old. Then he lived as a stranger for 17 years in Egypt, a land where his descendants were afflicted. So again, Jacob and his descendants were strangers in the lands they worked and were afflicted in Egypt until the 400th year. So following the Bible's instructions of the 400th year, we have put 399.6, the 400th year, minus 129.5, the number of years Jacob lived in Canaan, equals 207.1 years in Egypt. The 0.6 is not 0.5 in the 399 years to reflect a small adjustment because the calculations for the 400 years must end exactly on the month of Nisan when Exodus began. If that calculation is correct, a whole lot of other dates will fall into place as we develop the model. So the calculations had the adjustment necessary to reflect that the Exodus began in the month of Nisan, or 0.5 of a year, as also instructed by the Bible. The complete model will confirm this solution. By the way, we will use the letters A, B, and C besides the years to identify in the model the events that satisfy the three parameters required by the scriptures, right? So if we apply this, we see that from Jacob to Egypt, again, 129 and a half years, and from Egypt, arriving to Egypt, to the beginning of the Exodus, 207.1 years. That would put the year that the Exodus began on the year 1446.5, in other words, in the month of Nisan, which is the beginning of the Exodus, as per Genesis 15:13, right? So then reading Joshua, for 40 years the Israelites wandered through the desert. So we add 40 years to the calculations, and we see that the Exodus began again in 1446.5, which would be the month of Nisan, and would end on the year 1406, again in the month of Nisan. We see confirmation of the dates presented by the model, 1446 BC for the beginning of the Exodus and 1406 for its end, in many archaeological studies. That is as compared to the Exodus in the 1200 BC as traditionally believed, but that's at that time no vestiges of an Exodus is found. It's because it's wrong. Here we see archaeologist Titus Kennedy and philosopher of science Stephen Mayer explore what the science of archaeology reveal about the historicity of the exodus of Jews from Egypt at the 2023 Dallas Conference on Science and Faith, sponsored by the Discovery Institute.
And so you went to this place and you got video evidence of
I went to this place because there was no picture of this thing.
Just this record in this obscure theological journal.
Yeah, it's mentioned a few times. It's also mentioned in a sort of popular Egyptological book written by Donald Redford and a few other places, but it was not widely known. But there was no
documentation.
Picture. You couldn't find a photograph of this thing, and it was in danger of being destroyed, possibly too. A lot of monuments.
And you got video evidence of it as well.
Yes.
And the inscription describes the movement of these people through a particular region.
It places them approximately in the area of Edom, Moab, Transjordan. So this is in between. It's east of Egypt. It's essentially in between Egypt and Canaan, the settled promised land.
Okay, so wait, let's just stop there, because that's super significant, right? Because the biblical account says they're in Egypt and then they get into Canaan, but they go through Moab and Edom and then cross over east of the Jordan. I mean, those are the lands east of the Jordan River that they would have had to pass through during the period of or near the end of the wandering period before entering into Canaan. So what you've got then is not only documentation of the Israelites at point A, time 1, and the entrance into Canaan, that's Egypt, before 1446, but entrance into Canaan at point B, time 2, that's entrance into Canaan after 1410 or 1400-ish.
The video comes from the Discovery Science YouTube channel. Then we read in Acts 13:20. After that, he gave them judges for about 450 years, until Samuel the prophet. For this calculation, we need to know who was the first judge of Israel and when he began his commission. All the information is in the Bible. We get clued to the answer in Exodus 18 with an event that happened at the beginning of the Exodus. For clarification and confirmation, please read the whole chapter 18. So in Exodus 18, 13, 17 to 18, and 25 to 26, we read this. This is 13. And so it was on the next day that Moses sat to judge the people, and the people stood before Moses from morning until evening. And verses 17 and 18. So Moses' father-in-law said to him, the thing that you do is not good. Both you and these people who are with you will surely wear yourself out. For this thing is too much for you. You are not able to perform it by yourself. And verse 25 and 26, and Moses chose able men out of all Israel and made them heads over the people, rulers of thousands, rulers of hundreds, rulers of 50s, and rulers of 10. So they judged the people at all times. The hard cases they brought to Moses, but they judged every small case themselves. So Moses was the first judge, and Israel had judges for about 450 years until the death of the prophet Samuel. So we don't have an answer yet for the time between Moses and the first judge to the death of Samuel, but we know it's about 450 years. And for now, we only have the first 40 years of those about 450 years, right? So we can add that from Exodus beginning to end is 440 years, right? And now from Exodus to Samuel's death, again, we don't know, but we're going to find out. The solution is coming soon. We read in 1 Samuel chapter 25 and 26 that after Samuel's death, David left to the desert of Paran. There he encountered with Nabal and Abigail. And then David had his encounter with Saul by the road at the hill of Achilah. Then we read in 1 Samuel 27:1, and David said in his heart, now I shall perish someday by the hand of Saul. There is nothing better for me than that I should speedily escape to the land of the Philistines. It's reasonable to estimate that those two events, David's encounter with Nabal and Abigail, and his encounter with Saul, and then David's decision to escape, occurred within a few weeks, maybe a month, or maybe a little more. As the calculations advance, the outcome will confirm these estimates. So from that Samuel dies, and from Samuel's death to David going to Philistine, let's put about a month, right? Again, as we advance with the calculations, we'll see if these assumptions are right. So we read in 1 Samuel 27:7. David stayed in Philistine territory for 1 year and 4 months. So David stayed in Philistine 16 months. Then we read in 2 Samuel 2:1, it happened after these that David inquired of the Lord, saying, shall I go up to any of the cities of Judah? And the Lord said to him, go up. David said, where shall I go up? And he said, God said, to Hebron. So now from David at Philistine to him leaving Philistine and going to Hebron is 16 months, right? Then we read in 2 Samuel 2, verses 2 to 4. David went there with his two wives, Ahinoam from Jezreel and Abigail, who had been Nabal's wife from Carmel. David took his men and their families with him, and they settled in the towns around Hebron. Then the people of Judah came to Hebron and anointed David to be king over the tribe of Judah. So after David went to Hebron, he was anointed as king. In the previous Bible chapters, we learned that Saul had recently died and Judah had no king. It is reasonable to estimate that this took around a month, maybe a little less. Again, the finished model will confirm or deny the accuracy of these calculations. These are the calculations for this period, right? So we have from Samuel dies and from Samuel death to David in Philistine, around a month. From David's Philistine to then he stayed in Philistine for about 16 months, and then he went to Hebron, and then he stayed in Hebron and he was anointed king in about 1 month, probably very soon after he arrived, because there was no king in Judah. So the approximate time from Samuel's death to David becoming a king is approximately 1.5 years. This is the updated model, right? So we have now from Samuel's death to David king, 1.5 years. We're still missing a bunch of stuff there. We read in 2 Samuel 5:5. In Hebron, he ruled Judah for 7 years and 6 months. In Jerusalem, he ruled for 33 years over all Israel and Judah. So it was 40 years and 6 months, right? And in 1 Kings 6:1, Solomon began to build the Lord's temple 480 years after Israel left Egypt. He began building in the month of Ziv, which is the second month, or the month of Iyar, of the 4th year of his reign over Israel. So we use 479.9. From the beginning of Exodus, the construction of the temple began. Again, I use 0.9 and not 0.5 because of the many adjustments necessary to match dates explicitly indicated by the Lord in the Bible. That happened in the 4th year of Solomon's reign, so we use 3.5 years. Now we can calculate the missing value. So we have that the total amount of years, the 480th year. So we take 479.9, and now we put the values that we know. Exodus 40 years, Samuel death to David becoming king, 1.5 years. Then David was king for about for 40 years and 6 months. And Solomon to the temple, 3.5 years. That gives us the years between Exodus and Samuel's death was 394.4 years. So let's update the master model, right? Now we can populate the places where we didn't have information. So from Exodus to the death of Samuel, 394.4 years. From Samuel's death to David named king, it's 1.5 years. And then from David king to the temple is 40.0 years. That brings the temple dedication to 966.6 BC, right? That's 2 Kings 5:5 and 1 Kings 6:1. Those calculations in the model satisfy the 3 requirements. So the 400 years sojourning or living as strangers and afflicted in a land not theirs, the model gives us 399.6 years. That's if you add all the A's in the model, you're going to find that. That's Genesis 15:13 again. So that matches. About 450 years from the first judge to the death of Samuel, the model gives us 334.4 years. And temple construction on the 480th year from the beginning of the Exodus, and we get 479.9. So all the requirements are fulfilled. Then we read in 1 Kings 11:42, the length of Solomon's reign in Jerusalem over all Israel was 40 years. So from the temple to Rehoboam, there are 36.7 years. So we see here that from the first temple to Rehoboam, that was 36.7 years, and so he became king in the year 929 BC. The next calculations from Rehoboam to the death of King Zedekiah and the destruction of the first temple are not mine. They come courtesy of Edwin Thiel, the University of Chicago archaeologist and scholar. Remember that we are using information coming from established history, archaeology, astronomy, and other disciplines to confirm our calculations. Thiel's PhD dissertation, The Chronology of the Kings of Judah and Israel, later published as The Mysterious Numbers of the Hebrew Kings, is the most authoritative work on the subject. You can search the internet for Thiel's calculation if you want to dig deeper into the subject. It's really interesting. So this is the table with his calculations, and again, it's small. If you see it in a cellular screen, but a larger screen would work. Thiel's calculation end on the 344th year of the era of the kings from Rehoboam to Zedekiah. Thiel's chronology is correct, but not exact to the level we need because it lacks the month approximations. Using the same principles we have applied consistently through the model, and because we know that the second temple was destroyed in the month of Av of 586 BC, we have to use the beginning of the 344th year of that era so the integrity of the calculations are preserved. So we use 343.1 years, again, in the beginning of the 344th year, and add it to the model. Remember that there is a lot of numerical codependency in the model's calculations. And if we know the months when an event occurred, as described in the biblical text, then the calculations must reflect that. The model must reflect that. So from Rehoboam to the destruction of the first temple is 343.1 years. That makes the table ends with the year 586.8, and it's 0.8 because remember that we're using the original calendar that begins in Tishri at the time of the fall, and 0.8 reflects the month of Av in the year 586. Sorry. So we read in Ezra 6:15 and confirm when the second temple was finished. Now, the temple was finished on the third day of the month of Adar, which was in the 6th year of the reign of King Darius. This is Darius Hyptasis, right? The first temple was destroyed in 586 BC. Darius was crowned king of Persia in September 522 BC. So the second temple was dedicated in the month of Adar, of February, March, of 516 BC, which was still the 6th year of his reign. That is 70 years after the destruction of the first temple. We also know that the order to rebuild the Jerusalem's walls was given in the 20th year of Artaxerxes, as we read in Nehemiah 2:1-8. Artaxerxes was crowned king in the fall of 465 BC. As per our calculations in session 3, where we studied the prophecies in Daniel 9:24-27 about the day when Messiah would die, the order was given 19 years later in Nisan 1, 445 BC, or 445.5 BC. So, from the dedication of the second temple to the order of the reconstruction of the Jerusalem's walls, there were also 70 years. Let's update our model. Next is a calculation of the 69 weeks of years. From the order to rebuild the walls, the moat, of Jerusalem to the death of Messiah, there were 476 years. See session 3 for more information. It's 476.04, but we're not using the decimals for this calculation. We don't need that level of precision for this calculation, right? So here we are from Artaxerxes' orders to Jesus' death is 476 years. That puts the death of Jesus on the year 30, on the month of Nisan, That's where it's 30.5. Now, at this point, the calculations show that from the birth of Abraham in 2005.1 BC to the death of Jesus on Nisan 14.5 of a year of AD 30, there are 2035.6 years. For Jesus to be born on the 2000th year after the birth of Abraham, Jesus had to be born on 5 BC. Our calculations based on the year of Herod the Great's death before the Passover of 4 BC, a date most scholars agree, and the uneventful first year of Jesus land us on 5 BC for the birth of Jesus, which again is precisely 2000 years after Abraham's birth. Keep in mind that each calculation was made independent of each other, and in the end, they all work together perfectly. When we decode code 1, we will add to all this evidence an incredible and incontrovertible extra-biblical proof that Nisan 1 of the year 5 BC is the exact date of Jesus' birth. By knowing the date of Jesus' birth, we can also calculate and decode the date of Jesus' conception. When the evidence showed me when the Lord was conceived, I almost cried at the miracle and how everything, and I mean everything, has a meaning and everything works together. As I said, as I progressed with the model, I was surprised so many times. There were so many unexpected things. It's been quite a journey. Continuing with the study, during Jesus' life, there was a parenthesis in the Father's chronology of the 6,000 years, as it was the Son and not the Father who contended with humanity. Again, we read in Matthew 17:17, then Jesus answered and said, "O faithless and perverse generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I bear with you?" Not understanding that parenthesis is why so many calculations for the 6,000 years simply don't work. It's not just one prophecy alone, but it is the outcome of all prophecies that must work together. Let's update the calculations in the model. So Jesus was born in the 2000th year after the birth of Abraham. How, and I mean how, this is so exact and events work perfectly with other events. It's God, that's how. Jesus was born on Nisan 1, 5 BC, in the 2000th year after the birth of Abraham. This we will prove in a coming session. So there are 1999.6 years between the birth. It's incredible how, if we follow the instructions in the Bible in a strict form, the calculations are this exact. That is the second 2000-year segment from the birth of Abraham to the birth of Jesus. On the previous session, we already established the first 2000-year segment from the fall to the birth of Abraham. In the next session, we will study the last 2000 years from the death, not the birth, the death of Jesus, to the dedication of the third temple and the beginning of the last generation. See you in the next session.